The hull of the UNS Defiant Dawn groaned against the cosmic void, her scarred armor plating telling the story of humanity's desperate final stand. Captain Kalen Voss stood before the observation deck's reinforced viewport, watching distant stars flicker and die as the Kithran Armada consumed yet another system. Each extinguished light represented billions of lives snuffed out, entire civilizations reduced to ash and memory. "Sir, long-range sensors are detecting movement in the Arcturus sector," reported Lieutenant Seraph Valdres from the tactical station, her voice carrying the weight of impending doom. "The fleet, it's massive. Preliminary counts show over 300 dreadnoughts, each one larger than our entire remaining battle group." Voss didn't turn from the viewport. At 47, he had aged a decade in the past 3 years since the Kithran first appeared at the edge of human space. His once dark hair now showed streaks of silver, and lines of exhaustion etched deep furrows around his steel-gray eyes. Behind him, the bridge of humanity's last battlecruiser hummed with desperate activity as his crew prepared for what they all knew would be their final battle. "Commander Blackthorne," Voss called to his executive officer, a woman whose tactical brilliance had kept them alive through 17 separate engagements against impossible odds. "Status report on our remaining vessels." Zara Blackthorne consulted her data pad, her expression grim beneath short-cropped auburn hair. "The Resolute took critical damage to her main reactors during the retreat from New Geneva. She's running on auxiliary power only. The Gallant lost half her weapon systems and the Stalwart." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "The Stalwart went dark 6 hours ago. We have to assume she's been lost with all hands." The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of life support systems and the occasional beep of monitoring equipment. Voss finally turned from the viewport, his weathered face set in determination. The Defiant Dawn represented humanity's last hope, and he carried that responsibility like a physical weight on his shoulders. "Aegis," Voss addressed the ship's artificial intelligence, its holographic avatar materializing beside the command chair. The AI appeared as a shifting constellation of blue light, constantly reconfiguring itself as it processed millions of calculations per second. "Analysis of our tactical situation." "Captain Voss," Aegis replied in its measured, synthesized voice, "based on current fleet positioning and observed Kithran capabilities, our probability of survival stands at 0.03%. However, I must note that this calculation does not account for the variable of human unpredictability, which has consistently defied my projections throughout this conflict." A bitter smile crossed Voss's lips. Even their most advanced AI couldn't quantify the stubborn refusal of humanity to simply lie down and die. It was that same quality that had seen them rise from a single world to span the galaxy, and it would be that same quality that would define their final hour. "Sir," Ensign Lyric's Chen spoke up from the communication station, her youthful face pale but resolute. "We're receiving a transmission from the Kithran flagship. It's addressed to you personally." The main view screen flickered to life, displaying the terrifying visage of Overlord Kithra, the being responsible for the systematic annihilation of 1,000 worlds. Its chitinous carapace gleamed like polished obsidian, and its 4 eyes burned with an alien intelligence that had orchestrated genocide on an unprecedented scale. When it spoke, its voice was like the grinding of tectonic plates. "Captain Voss of the vessel designated Defiant Dawn," the creature intoned, each word carrying the weight of inevitable doom. "Your species has fought admirably, but your resistance ends here. Surrender now and I will grant your crew a swift death. Continue this futile struggle, and I will ensure their suffering spans generations." Voss stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture of absolute authority. "Overlord Kithra," he replied, his voice carrying across the bridge with unwavering conviction. "Humanity has one response to your generous offer." He paused, letting silence build the tension. "Come and take us." The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge of the Defiant Dawn in heavy silence. Overlord Kithra's threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud, but Captain Voss remained standing tall before the view screen, his defiance absolute. Around him, his crew worked with the quiet efficiency of those who had long since made peace with their fate. "Chief Morgrim," Voss called to his chief engineer through the ship's communication system. I need everything you can give me. Strip power from non-essential systems, reroute auxiliary feeds to weapons and shields. We're going to make them pay for every meter of space. Thane Morgrim's gruff voice crackled back through the speakers, tinged with the accent of the mining colonies where he'd been born. Already on it, Captain. I've got the fusion reactors running at 112% of recommended capacity. She'll hold together long enough for what we need to do, but after that... He left the implication hanging. Commander Blackthorn moved to stand beside Voss, her tactical mind already working through possibilities that seemed increasingly impossible. Kalen, she said quietly, using his first name in the privacy of their long partnership, we need to talk about the Omega Protocol. Voss's jaw tightened. The Omega Protocol was humanity's final desperate contingency, a plan so terrible that it had been classified beyond the highest levels of command. Only battlecruiser captains and above even knew of its existence, and the weight of that knowledge had haunted him since receiving his first command. Not yet, Zara, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. There might still be another way. Lieutenant Valdris looked up from her tactical display, her face grave. Sir, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the Kithran fleet. They're beginning to move into attack formation. Estimated time to weapons range is 47 minutes. 47 minutes. Less than an hour before the final battle for humanity's survival would begin. Voss closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of Earth, of the billions who had already died, of the children who would never grow up to see the stars. When he opened them again, his resolve had crystallized into something unbreakable. Aegis, he commanded, displayed tactical overview of our remaining assets. The holographic representation showed their pathetic fleet in stark detail. The Defiant Dawn, humanity's most advanced battlecruiser, bristling with weapons but already showing stress fractures along her hull. The crippled Resolute, limping along on auxiliary power with her main batteries offline. The damaged Gallant, her weapons reduced by half but her spirit unbroken. 3 ships against an armada that had swept across the galaxy like a plague. Sir, Ensign Shin reported, I'm receiving emergency transmissions from the outer colonies. The survivors on Kepler 442b are requesting immediate evacuation. The refugee fleet from the Vega system is asking for escort to the secondary rendezvous point. Voss felt the weight of those pleas like physical blows. Millions of civilians scattered across dozens of failing defensive positions, all looking to him for salvation he couldn't provide. The Kithran had learned humanity's weakness early in the war. They couldn't abandon their people, even when tactical wisdom demanded it. Zara, he said, turning to his executive officer, take a team and review the Omega Protocol files. I want options even if they're terrible ones. Blackthorn nodded grimly and headed for the sealed command briefing room where humanity's most desperate secrets were kept. As she left, Voss found himself alone with his thoughts for the first time in days. The responsibility of carrying humanity's final hope was crushing, but it was a burden he bore willingly. Captain, Aegis spoke, its holographic form shifting to a more humanoid appearance, something it only did during moments of particular significance. I have been analyzing historical data on seemingly impossible military victories. There are patterns, variables that my initial calculations cannot adequately account for. Such as? Voss asked, grateful for any reason for hope, however slim. Human creativity under extreme duress increases exponentially. Your species' capacity for sacrifice in defense of others appears to have no logical upper limit. And perhaps most significantly, you have consistently achieved victory not through superior firepower, but through tactics your enemies could not predict or understand. Voss managed a grim smile. Are you suggesting we can win this Aegis? The AI paused, its form flickering with intense calculation. I am suggesting that the concept of winning may need to be redefined. The Kithran measure victory in terms of absolute domination. But humanity has always measured victory in terms of what they preserve for future generations. The words hit Voss like a revelation. Perhaps Aegis was right. Perhaps this wasn't about winning in any conventional sense. Perhaps this was about ensuring that something of humanity survived, that their sacrifice meant something beyond the immediate tactical situation. Lieutenant Valdris, he called, begin preparations for Emergency Protocol 7. I want every piece of data on human civilization, every cultural archive, every scientific database copied to the Emergency Beacon Network. Sir? Valdris looked confused. If we can't save our people, Voss explained, his voice carrying a new note of determination, then by God, we'll make sure someone somewhere knows that we existed. That we fought. that we never surrendered. The emergency beacon preparation consumed the next 20 minutes as the crew of the Defiant Dawn worked with desperate efficiency. In the ship's secure data core, every aspect of human achievement was being compressed into quantum storage matrices. Shakespeare and Einstein, Mozart and Curie, the laughs of children and the tears of lovers, the dreams of a species that had dared to reach for the stars. Captain Voss walked the corridors of his ship, checking on his crew as they prepared for battle. In the weapons bay, Gunnery Sergeant Kane Brixworth was calibrating the main plasma batteries with the focused intensity of a man performing his life's final, most important task. The sergeant's scarred hands moved with practiced precision over targeting controls that would soon spit defiance at an overwhelming enemy. "How are we looking, Sergeant?" Voss asked, placing a reassuring hand on the younger man's shoulder. Brixworth looked up, his weathered face breaking into a grim smile. "She'll give us everything she's got, Captain. These old Mark 7 plasma cannons might not be the newest tech, but they'll punch holes in anything that bleeds." In the medical bay, Dr. Elena Cavros was preparing for casualties that everyone knew would be total. Her medical supplies were organized with military precision, though they both knew her real job would be ensuring that those who couldn't fight would die with dignity. She looked up as Voss entered, her dark eyes reflecting a lifetime of healing that would end in failure. "Doctor," Voss nodded respectfully, "thank you for everything you've done." She straightened, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Captain, I took an oath to do no harm. Today I think preventing harm to the memory of our species might require different choices." Voss understood. When the time came, Dr. Cavros would ensure that no one would suffer unnecessarily. It was a mercy he prayed they wouldn't need, but one he was grateful to have available. In the engineering section, Chief Morgrim had his teams pushing every system beyond its design limits. The fusion reactors hummed with barely contained energy, their magnetic containment fields glowing with an intensity that spoke of imminent overload. Morgrim himself was covered in coolant and sweat, his thick hands working miracles with failing equipment. "Chief, status report," Voss requested as he entered the main engineering bay. "She's holding together with prayers and profanity, Captain," Morgrim replied without looking up from his console. "I've got the reactors running hot enough to power a small star, and the weapon systems are drawing more energy than they were ever designed to handle. Give me an hour of combat, and I'll give you firepower that'll make the Kithrin remember our names." "And after that hour?" Voss asked quietly. Morgrim finally looked up, his eyes reflecting the blue glow of the reactor cores. "After that hour, Captain, we won't need to worry about it." Back on the bridge, Commander Blackthorne had returned from her review of the Omega Protocol, her face pale but determined. She held a sealed data tablet in her hands, its contents representing humanity's ultimate contingency plan. "The files are comprehensive," she reported quietly. "The yield calculations, the targeting parameters, the activation sequences. It's all there, Kalen. Everything we'd need to ensure that the Kithrin remember this day." Voss took the tablet, feeling its weight far exceed its physical mass. The Omega Protocol represented the sacrifice of everything humanity had built in this sector of space, but it might also represent their only chance to inflict meaningful damage on an enemy that seemed truly unstoppable. "Time to intercept?" he asked Lieutenant Valdris. 18 minutes, sir. The Kithrin fleet is maintaining standard approach formation. Their dreadnoughts are arranged in a three-dimensional matrix designed to provide overlapping fields of fire while minimizing their exposure to concentrated attack. Aegis materialized beside the command chair, its holographic form more solid and defined than usual. "Captain, I have completed analysis of the cultural data archives. The beacon network will carry the sum of human achievement across 12 different vector paths. The probability that at least one beacon will reach a civilization capable of interpreting its contents is 87.4%. "Good," Voss replied, settling into his command chair for what he knew would be the last time. "At least someone will know we were here." Ensign Chin looked up from her communication station, her young face showing the kind of resolve that had defined humanity's expansion to the stars. "Captain, I'm receiving final messages from civilian vessels throughout the system. They're singing, sir." "Singing?" Voss asked, puzzled. "The old songs, sir. Amazing Grace, Danny Boy, We Shall Overcome. Every ship, every station, everyone who's left. They're all singing together." The bridge fell silent as Chin activated the external speakers. Across the void of space, transmitted from 100 different sources, came the voices of humanity's last survivors. They sang not in despair but in defiance. They sang not for victory but for remembrance. They sang because they were human, and that was what humans did when facing the dark. Voss felt tears on his cheeks, but his voice remained steady as he activated the ship-wide communication system. "Crew of the Defiant Dawn," he announced, "in 10 minutes, we will engage an enemy that has conquered 1,000 worlds. We cannot win this battle in any conventional sense, but we can ensure that our sacrifice has meaning. We can show the universe that humanity does not go gentle into that good night." He paused, listening to the distant songs that filled the void between stars. "Today we fight not for victory but for memory. Not for conquest but for legacy. Let them remember that when they finally reach the cradle of humanity, we made them pay for every meter of space." The Kithran armada emerged from quantum-fold space like a plague of locusts descending upon the last harvest. 317 dreadnoughts materialized in perfect formation, their obsidian hulls absorbing light and radiating menace. Each vessel stretched over 2 kilometers in length, bristling with weapons that had reduced entire worlds to molten slag. Captain Voss stood on the bridge of the Defiant Dawn, watching death approach with measured calm. His crew had taken their positions with the quiet efficiency of veterans who had long since made peace with their fate. The civilian songs had faded to silence, replaced by the tense anticipation of impending battle. "Range to lead elements, 400,000 kilometers and closing," Lieutenant Valdris reported from her tactical station. "All weapons systems show green. Plasma batteries charged to maximum capacity." "Commander Blackthorn," Voss ordered, "signal the Resolute and Gallant. Attack pattern Omega-7. We're going to hit their formation where it's thickest and try to cause maximum disruption before they can coordinate their response." Blackthorn's fingers danced across her console, transmitting the attack orders to their sister ships. The Resolute, limping on auxiliary power, nevertheless began to accelerate toward the enemy formation. The Gallant, her weapons reduced but her spirit unbroken, took position for a flanking maneuver that would likely be her last. "Aegis," Voss commanded, "initiate combat protocols. Transfer all non-essential power to weapons and shields." Throughout the ship, lights dimmed as massive amounts of energy flowed to the plasma batteries and defensive systems. The Defiant Dawn shuddered as her engines pushed her beyond design specifications, Chief Morgrim's modifications allowing impossible acceleration toward an enemy that could destroy them with ease. "Sir," Ensign Chin reported, receiving transmission from the Kithran flagship. The main view screen flickered to life, showing Overlord Kithra's terrifying visage once more. The alien commander's 4 eyes burned with contempt as it spoke in its grinding, tectonic voice. "Captain Voss, you have chosen suffering over mercy. Your species' extinction will be remembered as an object lesson for future conquests. Surrender now, and I will spare your crew the agony of slow death." Voss stepped forward, his weathered face set in absolute determination. "Overlord Kithra, I have a message for you from the human race." He paused, letting the silence build before delivering his response with quiet conviction. "Go to hell." The transmission cut to static as the Defiant Dawn crossed the 400,000-kilometer threshold. Immediately, space around them exploded with energy as the Kithran fleet opened fire. Coherent light beams and plasma bolts filled the void between ships, turning the darkness into a deadly light show of unimaginable violence. "Evasive maneuvers," Voss shouted as his ship bucked under near misses from weapons powerful enough to shatter moons. "Return fire. All batteries target the lead Dreadnought." The Defiant Dawn's main gun spoke with voices of thunder, sending streams of superheated plasma across the void. The weapons, pushed beyond their design limits by Morgrim's modifications, punched through the lead Dreadnought's shields and carved molten furrows across its obsidian hull. "Direct hit," Valdris reported with grim satisfaction. "Enemy shields down 30%. Structural damage to their forward sections." But their victory was momentary. The Kithran formation adjusted with mechanical precision, bringing overlapping fields of fire to bear on the human battlecruiser. Energy beams lanced through space, and one found its mark, punching through the Defiant Dawn's port shields and vaporizing 20 meters of armor plating. "Hull breach on Deck 7. Chief Morgrim's voice crackled over the communication system. "Emergency containment fields are holding, but we've lost primary power to the port weapon arrays." Voss gripped his command chair as another impact sent shockwaves through the ship's superstructure. Around him, his crew worked with desperate efficiency, damage control teams racing to repair critical systems while the weapons crews maintained their rate of fire. "Sir." Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "The Resolute is making her attack run." On the main view screen, humanity's crippled heavy cruiser charged into the heart of the Kithran formation. Running on auxiliary power alone, she was no match for the alien dreadnoughts, but her captain had chosen to make his ship's death meaningful. The Resolute's remaining weapons blazed with desperate fury, targeting the enemy flagship's weapon systems with surgical precision. "The Resolute is taking massive damage," Valdris reported, her voice thick with emotion. They're not going to make it out of that formation." Voss watched in silent respect as the Resolute disappeared in a ball of superheated plasma, her brave crew taking 3 Kithran escort vessels with them into oblivion. Captain Martinez and his 800 crew members had bought them precious seconds with their lives, and Voss intended to make those seconds count. "Gallant is beginning her flanking maneuver," Blackthorn reported. "She's targeting the enemy formation's weakest point, trying to create a gap we can exploit." The smaller vessel danced between enemy fire with desperate grace, her captain using every trick of ship handling to avoid the deadly energy beams that filled space around her. The Gallant's reduced weapons blazed as she struck at the Kithran formation's flank, her crews knowing they were trading their lives for momentary tactical advantage. "All ships, concentrate fire on grid reference 77 Alpha, Voss ordered. "We're going to punch a hole through their formation and take as many of them with us as we can." The Defiant Dawn's weapons spoke again, joined by the Gallant's desperate fury. For a moment, it seemed as though their combined firepower might actually breach the Kithran formation. Energy beams and plasma bolts converged on a single point, overwhelming the alien shields through sheer concentration of force. But the moment passed. The Kithran fleet adjusted once more, their superior numbers and firepower beginning to tell. The Gallant took a direct hit from a Dreadnought's main battery, her hull splitting open like an overripe fruit. Captain Torres and her crew died instantly, vaporized by energies that could have powered a small city. "2 ships down," Blackthorn reported quietly. "We're alone." Voss nodded grimly, watching as the Kithran formation began to close around them like the jaws of some vast predator. The Defiant Dawn stood alone against an armada that had conquered 1,000 worlds, but she still had her weapons, she still had her crew, and she still had one final card to play. "Aegis," he commanded, "prepare the Omega Protocol for activation." "Authorization, Voss 77 Delta Prime." The Defiant Dawn shuddered under concentrated fire from a dozen Kithran dreadnoughts, her shields flashing and failing as energy beyond comprehension hammered against her defenses. Captain Voss felt each impact like a personal blow, watching his ship die by degrees while his crew fought with the desperate courage of those who had nothing left to lose. "Shield integrity down to 37%. Lieutenant Valdris shouted over the chaos of alarms and explosions. "We've lost the starboard plasma batteries and main sensor array. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 6. In the engineering section, Chief Morgrim was performing miracles with failing systems. His voice crackled over the communication system, barely audible over the sound of overloading equipment and emergency klaxons. "Captain, I'm reading massive stress fractures in the main hull structure. The magnetic containment on Reactor 3 is failing. We've got maybe 10 minutes before she comes apart." 10 minutes. Voss closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of the billions who had already died, of the children who would never grow up to see tomorrow. When he opened them again, his resolve had crystallized into something unbreakable. The Omega Protocol data tablet felt heavy in his hands, its activation codes representing humanity's final, desperate gambit. "Commander Blackthorn," he ordered, "begin evacuation of non-essential personnel to the emergency beacon arrays. If we're going to die here, at least our message will survive." Blackthorn's fingers flew over her console, coordinating the systematic withdrawal of crew members who weren't needed for the ship's final battle. Technicians and support staff moved through corridors filled with smoke and sparking electronics, carrying with them the compressed history of human civilization. "Sir," Ensign Chin reported, her voice strained but steady, "I'm detecting massive energy buildup from the Kithran flagship. They're charging some kind of super weapon." The main view screen focused on the Void Sovereign, Overlord Kithra's massive command vessel. Along its obsidian hull, previously hidden weapon ports were opening to reveal a device that pulsed with malevolent energy. The readings were off any scale that human science had devised. "Planet Killer," Aegis announced with mechanical precision. "Based on energy signature analysis, that weapon is capable of sterilizing all life on a world the size of Earth. They intend to use it on the remaining civilian evacuation sites." Voss felt a cold rage building in his chest. The Kithran weren't content with military victory, they wanted to erase every trace of human existence from the galaxy. The evacuation ships scattered throughout the system, carrying the last survivors of humanity's outer colonies, would be vaporized along with any hope for the species' survival. How long until they can fire? He asked. Weapon will be fully charged in 6 minutes and 47 seconds, Aegis replied. Less than 7 minutes to save what remained of humanity. Voss looked at the Omega Protocol tablet, its surface reflecting the emergency lighting of a dying ship. The plan was simple in its terrifying elegance. Overload every fusion reactor in the fleet simultaneously, creating an artificial supernova that would sterilize everything within 10 light minutes. It would destroy the Kithran Armada, but it would also vaporize every human civilian in the system. Kalen, Blackthorn said quietly, moving to stand beside his command chair. There might be another way. The Gamma-class emergency beacons have limited fold space capability. If we could modify their quantum drives. Go on, Voss urged, grasping at any alternative to the ultimate sacrifice the Omega Protocol demanded. We could use them as kinetic torpedoes. Launch them at near light speed into the Kithran formation. The energy release from their quantum drives would be enormous, and if we timed it right. Voss understood immediately. It was still a suicide mission, but it might save the civilian evacuation fleet while still delivering a devastating blow to the enemy. Aegis, analysis of Commander Blackthorn's proposal. The AI's holographic form flickered with intense calculation. Probability of successfully disabling the planet killer weapon, 73.6%. Probability of our survival, 0.0%. The energy release from multiple beacon drives would vaporize the Defiant Dawn along with a significant portion of the Kithran fleet. But the civilian ships would survive? Voss pressed. Affirmative. They are at sufficient distance to avoid the worst effects of the quantum detonation. Voss felt something like relief flood through him. They could still hurt the enemy, still protect what remained of humanity, without sacrificing every human life in the system. Do it. Modify the beacon drives for kinetic impact. Program them to target the flagship and the nearest dreadnoughts. Throughout the ship, his crew worked with desperate efficiency to implement the plan. In the beacon storage bay, teams of technicians rewired quantum drives never intended for offensive use, turning humanity's message to the stars into weapons of unimaginable destruction. Sir, Valdris reported, the Kithran formation is tightening around us. They're moving to point-blank range. I think they want to take us alive. Voss allowed himself a grim smile. Then they're going to be very disappointed. Chief Morgrim, I need everything you can give me. One final push. Morgrim's voice came back filled with fierce determination. You'll have it, Captain. I'm transferring all remaining power to the engines and weapons. She'll give you everything she's got left. The Defiant Dawn surged forward with her dying breath, her plasma batteries blazing one final time as she charged directly toward the Kithran flagship. Energy beams lanced through space around her, but somehow she continued on, her crew's skill and determination carrying her through a storm of fire that should have vaporized her instantly. Beacon modifications complete. Blackthorn announced. Ready for launch on your command. Voss gripped his command chair as another massive impact sent shockwaves through the ship's failing superstructure. Around him, his bridge crew worked with the focused intensity of those performing their life's final, most important task. They had come so far from humanity's cradle world, had seen so much, had lost so much. But they would not go quietly into the dark. Launch beacons, he ordered, his voice carrying absolute authority. All units, maximum velocity. Target the flagship. 5 modified emergency beacons streaked away from the dying battlecruiser, their quantum drives accelerating them to impossible velocities. Behind them, the Defiant Dawn continued her final charge, her weapons blazing defiance at an enemy that had conquered 1,000 worlds but had never faced anything quite like humanity's stubborn refusal to surrender. Impact in 30 seconds, Valdris announced. The Kithran are trying to intercept, but the beacons are too fast, too small. Voss stood from his command chair, looking around at his crew one final time. It's been an honor serving with all of you, he said quietly. Tell me, Aegis, will anyone remember what we did here? The AI's holographic form solidified into something almost human. Captain Voss, what you and your crew accomplished here today will be remembered as long as consciousness exists in this universe. You faced impossible odds and chose to fight anyway. That is perhaps the most human thing of all. The modified quantum beacons struck the Kithran flagship with the force of collapsing stars. Each beacon's overloaded drive core released energy equivalent to a small supernova, tearing through the Void Sovereign's obsidian hull like tissue paper. The massive Dreadnought, symbol of Kithran supremacy across 1,000 conquered worlds, broke apart in a cascade of secondary explosions that lit the void with hellish fire. Captain Voss felt the defiant Dawn buck and roll as the shockwave reached them, her failing superstructure groaning under stresses no ship was designed to endure. Around him, his bridge crew held their stations with grim determination, watching as their desperate gambit exceeded every hope they had dared to harbor. Direct hit. Lieutenant Valdris shouted over the chaos of alarms and groaning metal. The flagship is breaking apart. The planet killer weapon is going critical. The Void Sovereign's superweapon, half-charged when the beacon struck, erupted in a chain reaction that consumed a dozen nearby dreadnoughts. The energy release was visible across the entire star system, a brief new sun that announced humanity's final defiance to any who might be watching. Kytherin formation is in disarray, Aegis reported, its holographic form flickering as ship systems failed throughout the battlecruiser. Estimate 47% casualties among their fleet elements. The surviving vessels are attempting to regroup, but their command structure has been severely compromised. But even as they watched their enemy reel from the devastating blow, the defiant dawn continued to die around them. Chief Morgrim's voice crackled over the communication system, barely audible through interference and failing equipment. Captain, Reactor 3 just went critical. I've got maybe 2 minutes before the magnetic containment fails completely. After that, we'll be joining our ancestors whether we want to or not. Voss nodded grimly, accepting the inevitable with the calm of a man who had long since made peace with his fate. They had struck a blow that would be remembered, had saved the civilian evacuation fleet, and had shown the Kytherin that humanity would not go quietly into extinction. It was more than he had dared hope for when this final battle began. Commander Blackthorne, he ordered, final status report on the beacon network. Blackthorne consulted her failing displays, her fingers working to extract information from systems pushed far beyond their design limits. All cultural archives successfully transmitted. The beacon network is dispersing along 12 different vector paths. Probability of successful delivery to advanced civilizations remains high. And the civilian evacuation fleet? Safe, she replied with visible relief. They're beyond the engagement zone and accelerating toward the rendezvous coordinates. The children are going to make it, Kalen? For the first time since the battle began, Voss allowed himself to feel something approaching peace. Scattered throughout the galaxy, the last survivors of humanity would carry their species forward. They would remember Earth, remember the billions who had died in this war, remember the crew of the Defiant Dawn who had bought their freedom with their lives. Sir, Ensign Shin reported, her young voice steady despite the circumstances, receiving transmission from the remaining Kytherin vessels. They're requesting terms of surrender. The bridge fell silent except for the groaning of failing superstructure and the distant sound of emergency klaxons. Voss stared at the main view screen, hardly believing what he was hearing. The Kytherin Armada, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, masters of genocide on an unimaginable scale, were asking to surrender to a single dying human battlecruiser. Put them through, he ordered, straightening his uniform jacket with hands that trembled only slightly. The view screen flickered to life, showing not Overlord Kythera but a different Kytherin commander, its chitinous carapace marked with the burns and scarring of battle damage. When it spoke, its voice carried none of the arrogant certainty that had characterized their previous communications. Human commander, the alien said, its words carefully chosen, your resistance has exceeded all tactical projections. The loss of our command vessel and 47% of our fleet elements represents an unacceptable strategic failure. We request immediate cessation of hostilities and negotiation of withdrawal terms. Voss felt a laugh building in his chest, born of exhaustion and disbelief and the simple human inability to accept that the impossible had somehow become possible. A single battlecruiser had faced an armada that had swept across the galaxy like a plague, and somehow, impossibly, the armada was asking for mercy. Aegis, he said quietly, are you recording this? Every word, Captain. This conversation will be included in the beacon archives as part of humanity's historical record. Voss turned back to the view screen, looking into the alien eyes of an enemy that had underestimated the one quality that defined humanity above all others, their absolute refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. Kytherin Commander, he replied, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had clawed its way from a single world to the stars, your terms are as follows. Immediate withdrawal from all human-occupied systems, reparations for the worlds you have destroyed, and a guarantee that your species will never again target civilian populations. Those terms are acceptable, the Kytherin replied after a moment's hesitation. We will implement immediate withdrawal protocols. As Voss watched, the surviving Kithran dreadnoughts began to break formation, their quantum drives charging for the fold space jumps that would carry them away from this system and this defeat that would haunt their species for generations to come. Chief Morgrim, Voss called, status on reactor containment? 30 seconds, Captain, came the reply. Maybe 45 if we're really lucky. Voss looked around his bridge one final time, at the crew who had followed him into the jaws of certain death and emerged victorious through courage that defied every logical calculation. They had saved humanity, had preserved their species' future, had earned their place among the heroes who would be remembered as long as human civilization endured. It's been the greatest honor of my life serving with all of you, he said quietly. Aegis, final message for the Beacon Network. Humanity endures. We faced the dark and emerged victorious. Tell them we never gave up, we never surrendered, and we never forgot who we were. The fusion reactors finally failed, and the Defiant Dawn joined her crew among the stars. 3 months after the Battle of Defiance End, as historians would later name it, the evacuation ship New Horizon drifted through the outer reaches of the Kepler 438 system. Captain Elena Vasquez stood in the observation lounge, watching the construction teams work to establish humanity's new home among the stars. Around her, the last 10,000 survivors of the human race were building something that had seemed impossible just a few short months ago. Hope. The quantum beacon had reached them 2 weeks into their journey to the rendezvous coordinates, carrying with it the complete cultural archives of human civilization and the final transmission from Captain Kalen Voss. Every person aboard the evacuation fleet had listened to that message, had heard the voice of the man who had saved them all, had learned of the impossible victory that 3 ships had won against an armada that had conquered 1,000 worlds. Captain, called Lieutenant Sarah Chin, younger sister to the late Ensign Lyrics Chin who had died aboard the Defiant Dawn. We're receiving a transmission from the advanced scout team. They found something. The main view screen activated, showing the face of Commander Jake Morrison from the exploration vessel Far Horizons. Behind him, the interior of an alien structure was visible, its walls covered in symbols and markings that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. Captain Vasquez, Morrison reported, his voice filled with excitement and wonder, you need to see this. We've discovered a massive data repository, apparently abandoned by whoever built it. The AI translation protocols are working, and the initial findings are extraordinary. Vasquez felt her pulse quicken. In the months since the battle, they had detected several ruins scattered throughout this system, remnants of a civilization that had disappeared long before humanity had even developed space flight. The structures appeared to be monuments, libraries, time capsules left by species that had faced their own extinction and chosen to preserve something for those who would come after. What kind of findings, Commander? She asked. Morrison's image was replaced by scrolling alien text, symbols and mathematical equations that Aegis's successor AI was slowly translating into human language. As the translation progressed, the true scope of what they had discovered became clear. Captain, Morrison continued, this isn't just a repository. It's a monument to resistance. We found records of over 40 different species that faced the Kithran Armada and chose to fight rather than surrender. Most of them lost, but they all left something behind, some piece of their civilization for others to find. The records scrolled past, telling stories of courage and sacrifice that span millions of years. The Zealothi who had held the line for 3 years against impossible odds before their star system was sterilized. The Morphic Collective, whose hive mind had chosen dissolution rather than submission. The Eternal Wanderers, who had scattered their people across 100 different worlds before making their final stand. And now, Morrison's voice continued, they've added humanity to their memorial. Captain Voss's final transmission, the battle records from the Defiant Dawn, even the complete cultural archives from the Beacon Network. It's all here, preserved alongside the stories of every other species that chose defiance over defeat. Vasquez felt tears on her cheeks as she realized the true magnitude of what had happened 3 months ago. The Battle of Defiance End hadn't just saved humanity, it had become part of something larger, a testament to the power of courage in the face of overwhelming darkness. There's more, Morrison added. We've detected quantum signatures indicating that this repository is connected to similar monuments throughout the galaxy. Every species that has faced the Kithran and chosen to fight has left their story here. And now, every species that comes after will know what happened when humanity made its last stand. On the view screen, new text appeared, translated from the alien script by advanced AI protocols. It was a message, added to the repository just days after the Battle of Defiance End, written in a language that no human had ever seen but somehow conveyed meaning that transcended the barriers between species. To those who come after, know that on this date, in this place, the species called humanity faced the force that had conquered 1,000 worlds. They were outnumbered 300 to 1. They had no hope of victory in any conventional sense. They fought anyway. In their final hour, when all seemed lost, 3 ships stood against an armada. The battlecruiser Defiant Dawn, commanded by Captain Kalen Voss, chose sacrifice over surrender. Their victory reminds us that darkness, no matter how overwhelming, can never extinguish the light of those who refuse to yield. The message continued, describing the battle in detail, preserving not just the tactics and strategies but the human qualities that had made victory possible. The stubborn refusal to abandon their people, the willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of others, the simple but profound belief that some things were worth dying for. Captain, Morrison's voice brought her back to the present, there's one more thing. The repository contains coordinates for other human survivor groups scattered throughout the galaxy. We're not alone out here. There are others, refugees from the Kithran Advance, settlement ships that escaped the initial attacks. Thousands of them. Vasquez closed her eyes, feeling a weight she had carried for months finally beginning to lift. Humanity would survive. Not just the 10,000 souls aboard the evacuation fleet, but potentially millions scattered across the stars. They would rebuild, they would remember, and they would ensure that the sacrifice of the Defiant Dawn and her crew would never be forgotten. Commander Morrison, she ordered, begin transmitting the reunion coordinates to all the survivor groups. It's time to bring our people home. As the weeks passed, ships began arriving at the Kepler 438 system. Colony vessels that had fled the Kithran Advance, exploration ships that had been searching for new worlds when the war began, even a few military vessels that had survived the initial battles. Each arrival brought new stories of survival and resistance, new proof that humanity's spirit could not be broken by any force in the universe. Among the arrivals was a battered science vessel called the Carl Sagan, carrying a group of researchers who had spent the war years documenting other species that had faced the Kithran. Their leader, Dr. Marcus Webb, brought with him a collection of testimonies and records that painted a picture of galactic resistance spanning millions of years. The Kithran have been doing this for eons, Dr. Webb explained during a briefing aboard the New Horizon. Species after species, world after world, always the same pattern. They arrive, they demand surrender, they destroy everything that refuses to submit. But something changed 3 months ago. He activated a holographic display showing Kithran fleet movements across the galaxy. Instead of the aggressive expansion patterns that had characterized their behavior for millennia, their forces were consolidating, withdrawing from contested systems, adopting defensive postures. The Battle of Defiance End has become a legend among the species they've conquered, Dr. Webb continued. Word of humanity's victory is spreading through their empire, inspiring resistance movements on dozens of worlds. For the first time in their history, the Kithran are facing organized rebellion from within their own territory. The implications were staggering. Humanity's last stand had not just saved their own species, it had inspired a galactic uprising against an enemy that had seemed invincible. The courage of one battlecruiser and her crew was rippling across the galaxy, bringing hope to civilizations that had thought themselves forever enslaved. As Vasquez stood in the observation lounge months later, watching the first permanent structures take shape on humanity's new world, she thought about Captain Voss and his crew. They had died believing they were making humanity's final sacrifice, but instead they had planted the seeds of liberation for countless species across the galaxy. Above her, the stars shone with the light of distant suns, each one potentially hosting worlds where the story of the Defiant Dawn was being told and retold, inspiring new acts of courage and resistance. Somewhere among those stars, the Beacon Network continued its journey, carrying humanity's story to civilizations not yet born. The last battlecruiser was gone, but her legacy would endure as long as there were those who chose to fight against the darkness. In the end, perhaps that was the most human victory of all. Not the preservation of their species, but the preservation of the idea that some things were worth any sacrifice to protect. The galaxy would remember, and that memory would light the way for all who came after. The AI's holographic form solidified into something almost human. Captain Voss, what you and your crew accomplished here today will be remembered as long as consciousness exists in this universe. You faced impossible odds and chose to fight anyway. That is perhaps the most human thing of all.